The path of the just is like a shining light, shining brighter, bright as the noonday.
Hello and welcome to Walking in the Word. Today we're going to start a series on God's authority being used by His people to bring relational, transformational change in a society. We'll look at evidence of how intercession turns the tide of Satan's destructive plan into a divine reversal as God partners with His people who stand faithfully in their places of anointed authority. Throughout history, God has placed people in the right place at the right time to do His work and to carry out His plan. But the deliverance that is brought through intercession and righteous action is the focus of our study today, and these principles apply to us just as much now as they did in the time of Esther. The backstory of Esther in and of itself is amazing. She was an orphaned cousin of Mordecai, and we're going to pick up the story of Esther in chapter 4, verse 7. And it reads, "And Mordecai told the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also, he gave a copy of the written decree to Esther. Mordecai charged her that she should go to the king and make supplication on behalf of her people." So Esther counted the cost. She knew the consequences of going in before the king unsummoned, and that if he didn't extend his scepter to her of approval, that she could die, she could lose her life. But Mordecai reminded her of a very important principle, because she was also a Jewess. He said, if you don't do something, then you too will perish because of your heritage, because the price is on your head as much as any other Jew in the land of Persia. And so she made the decision. She said, if I perish, I perish. She made the decision to take action. And then Mordecai's famous words that he spoke to her, who knows but whether you have come into the kingdom, but for such a time as this. And we could be born, we could have been born any time in history. But God chose to put us on this earth at this time to be part of yet another divine reversal. In Esther's time, she called days of prayer and fasting for all the Jews of the land, and she was determined to do her part to see the salvation of her people. Chapter 5, we see the divine reversal begin to play out. God's authority was being used by His anointed people to turn the tide of destruction. So if we pick up with verse 9 in chapter 5, under the heading of Haman's plans to hang Mordecai. Verse 9 says this, Haman had a glad heart, but when Haman saw that Mordecai was in the king's gate and that he would not stand or move for him, he was full of fury against Mordecai. And when Haman came home, he sent and called for his friends and wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches, of his many sons, and of all the king's promotion to him, how that he had been advanced above all of the princes and the servants of the king in the land. So Haman's arrogance was as obvious as his hatred for Mordecai, we see. And he acted on his wife's recommendation that a gallows 50 feet high be put up to hang Mordecai on. But the next thing that happened was very interesting. That night, that very night, the king had what I'm going to call a God-ordained insomnia. Couldn't sleep. So he got up and he requested that the books of memorable deeds be brought and read to him. So this book contained all of the deeds that were in favor of the king. And this was the very night before Esther was to plead for the lives of her people. And so as he was reading the book of memorable deeds, or having it read to him, he was reminded how that Mordecai had exposed a plan of two of his doorkeepers, eunuchs that were his doorkeepers, that had plotted to destroy the king. And so he asks of those that are reading this book, what was done to honor Mordecai, who saved my life? And as the search went on, they found that nothing had been done. Nothing had been done to honor Mordecai. And so what we see happen next is this divine reversal ramps up. The next morning, just as Haman goes to the king to request that Mordecai be taken out of the picture, request his life be in Haman's hands, the king asked Haman a very pertinent question. It was very general. There were no names mentioned. But the king asked of Haman right then and there, what should be done to honor the one that the king has found favor with? And so because of Haman's own arrogance, he assumed it was him. He assumed that he was the one that was to be honored by the king. And so he didn't hold back anything. He said, well, I think that he should have a royal crown put on him. He should have a robe put on him. And he should be led through the streets on one of the king's horses. So taking Haman's advice, the king prescribed that very thing for his mortal enemy, Mordecai. Can you imagine the shock and the dismay that Haman felt when he realized the very man whose life he came to request that day, now he was going to be put in charge of parading this man around the city and being honored because the king had found favor with Mordecai. So the divine reversal ramps up. The tables are turned on Haman. Not only does Haman have his self-assumed honor taken, but now he's the very one that the king has commanded to honor Mordecai. And so we see, excuse me, that as Esther has called and summoned Haman and the king immediately after this to come to a banquet, we see that the plot is then revealed. Esther reveals the plan of Haman, and she even fingers him before the king. She said, who is this? He said, who is this one that wants to destroy the Jews? And she reveals that it's Haman. And so what happens next? The king is so angry, he gets up and he leaves the banquet. Haman falls upon the couch that Esther is sitting on. And so the king comes in and sees this going on and assumes that Haman is there to attack the queen. And immediately, he pronounces judgment on Haman. And the guards take him away to be destroyed. So let's read in chapter 7 of Esther, verse 9. One of the eunuchs said to the king right then and there, look, wooden gallows 50 cubits high, on which Haman made for Mordecai, stand in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. And they hanged Haman on the wooden gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. The same sentence reads, the next sentence reads, on that day, the king gave Esther Haman's house. So not only was there a divine reversal of Satan's plan, but God's anointed intercessor was actually given the spoils of the enemy. And of course it was seen that she was also Jewish. So she was pleading for the king for her own life. The idea is the whole plan was exposed. it was uncovered. The cover was taken off. And so there is present truth to be gleaned from this story of Esther. God is well aware of all of Satan's plans and schemes. He knows that always, ultimately, his plan is to take over and rule God's crown of creation, mankind. And so once again, we find ourselves in a very difficult place. Throughout the world, events are unfolding. Instability, fear is running rampant. But just because Satan's plan looks foolproof doesn't mean anything. Esther's story taught us that. Psalms chapter 2, verses 2 and 3 tell us that the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers plot together against Jehovah and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands in two and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. Jehovah shall mock them. God has never been outmaneuvered or overpowered by Satan. He never has, not throughout history. No matter how many gather together in agreement with the plot of Satan, our enemy, there's never going to be a time when he outplays his power and authority against the power and authority of God Almighty. But we, the intercessors, must hear and partner with the plan of God. God doesn't have to use humans to overpower and destroy the plans of the enemy, but he chooses to. Like any good father, he wants his sons and daughters to be in on the plan that he has. And so he wants to bring about his purpose utilizing you and I. So we must say and do as the church, as God instructs us to do, not just intercede in prayer, but intercede through righteous acts that he reveals to us day by day. This downfall of Haman has been prophesied even in present time through a number of prophetic voices, that Haman will hang on his own gallows. In other words, the plan of the enemy will backfire in such a way that Haman will literally, as he did, or figuratively, as he literally did then, he'll hang on his own gallows. The very plan he set for his perceived enemy, God's man, is going to backfire on him. So I'm going to read 1 Kings, a passage in 1 Kings chapter 19 that has so much significance. We're going to look at verses 27 and 28, but first I want to refer to something that God said of his enemies in verse 25. He said, I've caused these things to happen. I've caused the events that are playing out. I've caused them to happen. They weren't accidental. They didn't just happen on their own. He's talking and referring to the enemies of God at this point in history. Verse 27 says, but I know you, your enemies, God's enemies. I know you're sitting down, you're going out, and you're coming in because of your rage against me, God says of his enemies, and your arrogance has come up before me. I will put a hook in your nose and a bridle in your mouth, and I will turn you back by the way which you came. In other words, he's going to cause a divine reversal. And I will turn you back by the way which you came, the Lord says. And so the enemy, in any form or shape or any time in history, is no match for the power of God. But again, he desires for us, his people, to be in partnership and to see this plan unfold on the earth. So Alton, what do you have to add to this story?
Well, everybody likes this story because the good guy gets it, or the bad guy gets it. And the good guy is triumphant, and it's the plot of how many books and movies where the bad guy seems to have the upper hand, and he even has the majority of the people on his side because he lied to them. But the truth comes out, And in the end, the good prevails over the evil. And so we see this time and again. And Haman's name means magnificent. So he had a pretty good, whoever gave him the name thought highly of him, but God didn't think highly of him. And so we see his own pride and everything working against him and bringing him into a place of destruction. And, even in those movies, when the good guy is found out to be the good guy, everybody now gathers around him and they, change their attitude and everything. And it says that the Jews, it says in Esther 16:17, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And there's a great line. And many of the people of the land became Jews. What do you think about that? For the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, if you look up that word fear, fear causes an agitation. And the word for fear and the word for awe are the same one. When you see something you don't understand, a little bit of fear is there and agitation. When Paul said, be angry and sin not, he was quoting from Psalm 4, where David said that. But David said, stand in awe and sin not. When you see something you can't explain, it's going to cause an agitation, And they decided, hey, these guys have something we don't have, and so we're going to join them. And so, how many people are going to see us in times coming? And the word saint in the Greek means an awful thing. Now, when you read that, you go, we're not supposed to be awful. We're supposed to be the nice guys. It doesn't mean you're terrible. It means when somebody looks at you, they are going to be full of awe. They can't explain us. They don't know what to make of us. But they're gonna understand. They're gonna come to a place where they're gonna want to join. And that's when we have to be ready. I want to go to Zechariah 8:23, and it says, thus saith the Lord, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all languages of the nations, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, we will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. We all know that they named Jesus and they named him Emmanuel, which means God with us. The EM part of Emmanuel is the word for with. They saw that God was with them, Emmanuel. They want to be a partaker of that. So we have heard that God is with you, so we want to be with you. Now, if you take something away from this Esther episode, it's not only that the good guys won and the bad guys lost, it's that those that didn't understand what even was going on are going to now understand, and they're going to come looking for you because they see God's with you. You say, well, I'm not a Jew. Sorry, but you are. People think Jews are here and the Gentiles are here. If you read Paul's epistles, you'll see that we are now in the commonwealth of God, of Israel, that he tore down that middle wall of partition. There's no longer Greek and Jew. There's only the Israel of God. Out of two, he tore down the middle wall of partition, and out of two, he made one new man. And so they're going to come looking for you, and you need to be able to steer them in the right direction with the word and show the love of God first and foremost, because they're not going to come to anything short of that. They already got the other stuff. They're looking for something different, something that's going to take them out of what they are in right now. And so he wants to be with us. And so, you know, what God wants to make out of each and every one of us is awesome. And when they look at you, it's like looking at a tornado, you know? It's something to be afraid of, maybe. But the power of it is so awesome that you got to almost look at it. And so God's looking for a people that will stand with him so that other people will see that he's with us. And then they will want to be with. Okay? Isn't that a beautiful thought? And, you know, in Isaiah 4, it says that in that day shall 7 women take hold of one man and say that we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel, but let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. Well, you know what? He'll let you have his name to take away your reproach, but you're going to eat his bread and you're going to wear what he provides for you to wear. And so imagine that. People are going to be coming in droves, and we need to be ready.
That's all the time that we have for today. Join us again next week where we'll talk more about God's authority being shown through his people as we partner with his plan. Have a good day and be blessed.
Wrapped up in the bundle of life, with you, my Father, wrapped up in the bundle of life. I'm covered, completely surrounded by you, God, by you, God. Though the storms rage outside, though the troubles don't cease, you enfold me, oh Lord, in your peace. Wrapped up in the bundle of life, with you, my Father, wrapped up in the bundle of life. I'm covered, completely surrounded by you, God, by you, God. I look to you for victory. I'm wrapped inside your covering. You'll defeat my enemies as I cling to you. Wrapped up in the bundle of life, with you, my Father, wrapped up in the bundle of life. I'm covered, completely surrounded by you, God, by you, God, by you, God.